So this work is about my son, Diego. It is, in a way, an homage to him. He is becoming a man, and I decided that I wanted to photograph his life and see what I would get. So he spends a lot of time working on his car, riding his electric dirt bike down the riverbed, spending time with friends. And I wanted to sort of document that, but also kind of create something that would look like a genre scene, a little bit more staged. So I went about, sort of figuring out what I wanted to photograph. Wrote notes about want to photograph Diego with his friends at the riverbed. Want to photograph Diego setting off fireworks. Want to photograph him working on the car, that kind of thing, and sort of envisioned what I wanted. But these were all scenes that I had seen before. So these are really in between a sort of snap shooting practice and a really, elaborate staged practice. They are staged, but it's not elaborate. But they're also images that I had seen happen, right? And they're kind of reenacted. I wanted to also incorporate a sort of cinematic storytelling color scheme. These are, in a way, cinematic images. They're a little bit more rectangular. I've used color grading that comes from cinema. And so some of these scenes will remind you perhaps of a movie that you've seen. I think one of the images is kind of directly taken out of Dazed and Confused, right, with the El Camino instead of a Chevelle. So I wanted to bring that element into it as well, which is really different, I think, from previous work that has been really almost like, I would just say, not as exuberant as the color is in this series. So Diego and I live in a suburban tract home development. They're referred to as subdivision or subdivisions, therefore the title of the show. One of the things that was important to me was to depict the life of a young Chicano male who's not living in the barrio, who's living in the suburbs, who has many different colored friends and who has resources. He has a car, he has a electric dirt bike, he lives in a single family home. There's, I think, this concept that Chicanos, basically live in the barrio. And of course, my family did live in the barrio. I mean, my first house was in El Sereno. I don't know if I want to call it barrio. I maybe want to call it, majority Latinx community or something like that. My parents grew up in Boyle Heights. My whole family history is in Boyle Heights. But there's a whole segment of the Mexican American population that lives in, in the suburbs. And, in Southern California, the suburbs range from, single family, one story homes to, to multi-story, expensive homes. The suburbs in Southern California are very different from neighborhood to neighborhood. Getting back to the Mexican American population here in Southern California, because immigration has been happening for such a long time and is constant, there's a constant flow. We live in so many different social economic levels. And so to only depict Chicano life as barrio life is disingenuous, I feel. And I wanted to depict how I live. I'm a professor. I'm a known photographer. I come from a middle class family. And so it was important for me to, in this series in particular, to let that be known. I think we need to widen the idea of what it means to be Chicano instead of narrow it. And so I think maybe this work helps to do that. And also, I think that I've perhaps, you know, grabbed a wider audience for the work as well. Because so many people can relate to suburban life and what it was like to be a teen living in the suburbs. Backyard parties with your friends, riding bikes down the street, getting your first car, all those things that we kind of are, somewhat nostalgic and that we treasure. I think my son is living right now. I think there's a huge difference between when I was growing up and when Diego was growing up, because when I was growing up and we were outside and boyfriends were working on cars and, um, you know, kids were riding their bikes and skateboarding or whatever, there was a lot of people, there was a lot of teenagers, there were a lot of kids out on the streets um, doing these things. We had television. That's it. So we were out. And our parents were not as worried about us. So we could go miles away. We could walk, bike miles away from where we lived. And, parents would not be that concerned. Um, I think the difference now is that Diego and his friends are the only ones out there. They just happen to all be raised by parents who think that it's important for them to get experience in the real world and are unafraid about, not exactly unafraid, but less afraid about something happening to them. I've often said that my son is out of time. He should have been growing up in the 70s or something, in the 80s, where young men were learning how to work on cars. It was essential part of their growing up to know how to do an oil change and fix brakes. So, or, even have a dirt bike. They can't ride their dirt bikes on the sidewalk, so they go to the riverbed, which is kind of this sort of no man's land, right? A sort of anything goes space. So at least he has that. Back when I was growing up, it was not a problem. Kids rode dirt bikes down the street, down the sidewalk. So I think in a lot of ways, my son has a lot of freedom that other kids don't have. And I think part of that has to do with how I grew up and the freedom that I had. He's a much better kid than I ever was, I have to say. This series, in terms of the imagery of Diego and his friends, is going to continue. This is the core of the series, but I definitely will be adding to it because, of course, his life evolves. I want to stay with that. I want to continue to photograph that. And then an outgrowth, I think, of this series and this idea of Diego becoming a young man and, our life, our relationship changing. One of the things that as he's gotten older and is sort of leaving the nest, the attention has come back to myself. What I've become through being a mother, through being a single mom, through being a mother of an only child, through being a mother too that really has a bonded relationship with her child. So how has that changed me? Obviously I've aged, and that brings along a whole boatload of issues when it comes to photography, right? And how women are depicted. I was often asked, this probably the last 10 years, why don't you do performance for camera anymore? Why don't you do self-portraiture anymore? Because I did a lot of it when I was younger. And I have to be honest, a part of me was reticent to photograph myself as an aging person, as somebody who is getting older. Because when we look at photographs of women, we want to see beauty. And so I'm not saying I'm not beautiful, but I'm saying I'm definitely older, there's signs of age for sure. So I had to think about that deeply and try to figure out what I want to say about that process. And so that will kind of be, in a way, an internalized kind of answer back to this work in a lot of ways, because it's going to be about me and all my various different roles as a person, as a woman, and trying to make peace with my image on film, kind of returning to that earlier performance for camera work that I did, albeit different in color, likely. So I've just begun that process of thinking about what the images will be, writing those things down, preparing the space. For a long time, my space was a reflection of Diego, whether it be Legos on the floor or, his toys in the living room. And I'm making my space now more about me and what I want to see in my space. And so even the process of beginning this work is requiring that I change my environment a little bit. So that's what I'm working on right now. It's slow because I'm pretty busy right now. So it's slow progress, but it's coming along.